Um,
I'm Sandra. This is policy and administration at the level. On participatory processes to achieve environmental and policy and conflict management. Now, this panel is about local sustainability, urban practices from the perspective of municipal leaders, and conversation around the various kinds of resources. The panel will evaluate climate change. So, first of all, I would like to thank our sponsors. So we have the following sponsors: Platform Brewery, Downtown Cleveland and Lands, Supply Side Move, Omer and Barn, Rotary Club of Cleveland, Eaton, Taiwan Sister Cities, Stanic USA, Margaret Owan and Associates, Team Yale, Peace Corps, and 12 Literary Arts. And we are heartily thanking them concerning this family, which promises to be very interesting. Our panelists today are Kristin Hall, Director of the Office of Sustainability. Dobrica yet, and he is leader of the citizens movement Don't Let Belgrade Burn in Slovenia. And Patrick Kearns, who oversees the education and programs of Refugee response. Taggart, project, and Stanic, head of the Department of Ljubljana in Slovenia. So what we will do now is give 5 minutes to each panelist to introduce themselves briefly and then tell about their sustainability work. And we'll go in the following order. Moderator introduced the panelists. First we'll have Kristin and and then Patrick, Morgan, and I would then like to, if there's any time left, I would like to pose to some questions. Let's hear what you all have to say to us. Kristin, would you start us off, please?
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay? Great, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Kristin Hall. I'm the Director of Sustainability in the City of Cleveland Mayor's Office of Sustainability. We have been around since 2005 and became part of the Mayor's Office in 2009 with the launch of our Sustainable Cleveland initiative. If you are not familiar with Sustainable Cleveland, it started as originally 10-year initiative to turn Cleveland into a green city on a blue lake by the year 2019, which corresponds with the 50th anniversary of the last time the Cuyahoga River caught on fire. We celebrated that last year. Celebration here, our Cuyahoga 50 celebration in Cleveland. And really, used Sustainable Cleveland to drive a lot of our action over the years. One of the biggest things that it helped support was the creation of a climate action plan. Our original climate action plan was drafted in 2013, really focused on greenhouse gas reduction emissions, both through our city operations, but also at a larger municipal level or larger city level outside of just what we control municipally. So that led a lot of our action between 2013 and 2018. And most recently, we've updated that climate action plan and are now on a 5-year update cycle. The most recent version of our climate action plan is a little unique in that we really were very intentional in emphasizing equity throughout the development of the plan, really from start to finish. So a couple examples. First, we had a 90+ member climate action advisory committee that helped weigh in on the plan, provide a lot of details on the various actions. And we asked all of those different members to participate in, at a minimum, a half-day racial equity training And several went on to do even 2-day racial equity training. So it helped to have everyone kind of have that lens in front of them as we developed a lot of these actions. Additionally, we had 12 different neighborhood workshops that helped inform the plan. So we really went into the community and tried to hear from them on what is important to you, what do you care about, and not necessarily weighing too much on the climate side. We talked a little bit about some of the climate impacts, but more, what are those values that you want to see maintained throughout your neighborhood? And then we had a final workshop to really make sure that our residents felt that what they said was reflected in the plan. That is one of our focus areas, which is now titled Clean Energy. So just to back up, at every workshop that we had, we always heard the words clean, safe, and healthy consistently, every single one. So for us, when it came to actually drafting the language of the plan, we wanted to make sure that what we heard was also what was reflected in the final plan. So our clean energy focus area was used to be named advanced and renewable energy. So it was great to kind of see just how we were able to really illustrate what we heard from our residents. Now, as we move ahead beyond 2019, we're focusing on how we actually measure some of this progress, both through our climate action plan, but we recently signed on to Lead for Cities and Communities through the U.S. Green Building Council. And it's a platform, if you're familiar with Lead for Buildings, it's very similar in that it has, different criteria to meet in order to meet those different certification levels, certified gold, silver, platinum, et cetera. So we're really looking forward to that as being a key tool for us to sort of measure our progress and tell us if we're going to be that green city on a blue lake. We've got tons of projects in the works, but in the interest of time, I'm going to keep those to myself until maybe they come up during the questions. And with that, I will turn it back to Sandra, and thank you for having me. I think you're still muted.
I can't hear, but I'm pretty sure that I go next. So if everybody can hear me, I'll just jump in. So good morning. Nice to have you all here, and good to see some of the comments and some of the and some of the people joining. So great to be a part of this panel. If you didn't catch the introduction or just recently joined, my name is Patrick Kearns, and I'm the Executive Director of the Refugee Response. We are an independent 501c3 based only in the city of Cleveland, Ohio, and we work with newly arrived people that are coming into Cleveland through the federal refugee resettlement program from all over the world. This is our 10th anniversary, actually, is happening right now. So we've been around since 2010. And over that time, we've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of newly arrived folks who are coming into the area. Our organization, we run 6 programs. Yeah, but I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sandra. So we run 6 different programs. We focus on education programs, employment programs, content creation. And then I think what's most applicable for this morning is we operate an urban farm that's called the Ohio City Farm, which is right in the near west side of Cleveland. So the Ohio City Farm broke ground in 2010, started as a collaborative process with different individual partners, and over that time has developed into one of the largest urban farms in North America. We operate it strictly as a social enterprise, meaning that our products we grow, the produce we grow, goes directly into the market through CSA memberships, through sales to over 20 different restaurants, and through our farm stand. And with that income, then we create positions for newly arriving people. We're at an average minimum wage right now of $13.60 per hour for our farm team, on the way up to $15 an hour, hopefully by the next growing season, which, comparatively, if we look at the agriculture sector, is very much more than a competitive wage. And being as we're located in the city, it's an accessible destination for a lot of our families to come to work. So we do Monday to Friday. They can show up in the morning after they drop their kids off at school or daycare, or in these days, facilitate care for them at home, and then they're home in the afternoons by the time the family's together again. The project started on a piece of property that it used to be housing estates as part of the Metropolitan Housing Authority here. It was torn down in the late 90s. It sat as an open space, as an open field for a period of probably about 10 years while they mowed the grass, until there was the idea to look at, well, what is the soil quality of this site? They tested the soil, and as it had never been manufacturing, it allowed for organic growing. So we broke ground in 2010 and have been farming that land consistently for the past 10 years. We have close to 300 CSA members. So if you're not familiar, CSA is a community supported agriculture. And that is really the backbone of that program. So just wanted to give a quick overview on that. So thanks. Happy to be a part of this conversation and look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists here.
Now, can you hear me? Yeah, never mind. It's the vagaries of technology. And what I was saying before, when you couldn't hear me, is that I'm so proud to hear what all is happening in my city, because Kristin was telling us. And now I heard from Patrick, and it makes me even prouder. I'm really, really enthused by all these projects. I would like to now ask Morgan to tell us what she does.
Thank you. It's great to be here with all of you. My name is Morgan Taggart. I'm the director of the FAIR project, Food Access Raises Everybody, which is based here in Cleveland, Ohio. My work in Cleveland around food access began back in about 2008 when I was one of the founders of the Food Policy Coalition here. And through that work, we worked very closely with the City of Cleveland and the Office of Sustainability and several other departments to really understand how local policy was affecting the ability to grow and access healthy food in our community. And throughout the course of several years, working in partnership with a lot of organizations across the city, as well as the city hall and city departments, we made a lot of changes to support urban agriculture in our city, getting access to water and land for urban growers, changing the zoning regulations that would allow people to keep chickens and bees. We also looked at ways to encourage city contractors to purchase local food from local farmers like Ohio City Farm, how to open up opportunities for food entrepreneurs with food trucks and mobile food businesses, as well as working with farmers markets, which are kind of direct to consumer markets throughout Cleveland, to make sure that those markets could accept federal nutrition benefits so that that food was open and access to everybody regardless of income. And so as we were doing that work over several years, I think there was tremendous collaboration among partners and institutions, but I think one of the things that we noticed that was missing in those conversations was strong community voice and the voice of residents, and really determining the solutions to address healthy food access in their own communities. So in 2015, we created a project, an initiative called FAIR. This was started by the Food Trust, which is actually based in Philadelphia, and we began to identify local community leaders, grassroots efforts, and organizations that had ideas, had identified issues in their own community related to food access, and tried to figure out ways to help build their capacity, offer training and technical assistance, as well as grants and resources, so that both grassroots and community leaders, as well as institutions and organizations, could be working together in a more broad network to address access to healthy food using really comprehensive solutions. And so today, 5 years later, FAIR is kind of continuing that work, and we build community collectives in several Cleveland neighborhoods where we work hand in hand with residents to identify those pressing issues in their own community related to access to healthy food, but also community health and social determinants of health. Because we know that food access is related to a host of other community and economic and health issues, and a lot of these systems are kind of intertwined with each other. And so we build the capacity of community members and residents to identify the critical issues around food access and then create their own solutions and drive that change in their community. On the food access side at FAIR, we also do a lot of work with the food retail network in Cleveland, both small corner stores and convenience stores, as well as independent groceries, helping them with financing, helping them bring healthier products in their community, and doing events with them to engage the customers in those stores so they know all the healthy options that are available there. So we try and kind of work on the supply side and the demand side here in Cleveland, and really making an effort to ensure that we're collaborating across the system with a lot of different types of partners to address these really complex issues. I think there's a lot of projects, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about how COVID and the pandemic has shifted a lot of our work, because food has been at the center of so many of these issues. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of our work as related to that in a few. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Morgan. Again, I'm happy to hear that all of you are working in a participatory fashion. This is one of my foci for my research and for what I do. So I'm glad that this works out well, just as I tell my students. And now I'd like to ask Ivan to tell us what he does in Ljubljana. Okay, so apparently Ivan is having some problems like I am too. So I'm just gonna tell you what else is coming until he's trying to resolve his problems. I'm gonna tell you what we'll do next so that you can prepare your answers. I have 3 questions for you, and then you can go on and we can have a chat if there's time left. But my first question will be about the obstacles that you are directly facing in your work, depending on your position, location, community, and access to whatever resources you need to pursue your work. So the first question will be obstacles. The second question Morgan promised to address already, and it is how the pandemic impacted your work, if at all. And I know mine has been impacted. I can't imagine that you haven't been impacted too. And then I will want to know how your work directly impacts the general audience that we have today, and what actions the audience might take to help. In other words, you are participatory. I would like to hear what your dream contribution from your stakeholders might be. So, Jenica, do we have Ivan? How about, I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yes, good. So how about we start on the questions, because I don't know whether Ivan has resolved his problem. Ivan, do you hear me? He doesn't. So let's tackle the obstacles that you are directly facing in your work. In the same order that you started speaking. So starting with Kristin, maybe.
Great, thank you. I could probably go on for a while about some of the obstacles that we have as we try to, you know, implement sustainability, especially now. I'm going to hold off on addressing, I'm going to take us back maybe 6 months to a year. We're going to pretend like we're not in a pandemic right now, because I feel like the obstacles have only gone up since then. You know, I think some of it is getting buy-in from all of the stakeholders that we need to participate in this. You know, you had mentioned that we all are really trying to be very participatory, and I think that's what we've seen has made us successful over the years, is being collaborative. And you know, I think I've really taken from our climate action plan, really trying to hear from folks, you know, be that residents, be that other city departments or other entities throughout the city, engaging them as early as possible so that we can make sure that their voices are heard, that we're taking into account any of their considerations. Especially, you know, I think of working in the city, we have so many departments that deal with our operations. Our office doesn't work with that on a daily basis. So we may come in with these great ideas to make the city more sustainable, but may not be thinking of the burden that may put on some of our workforce to actually implement some of these projects. We often try to find a lot of grant funding that usually helps soften the blow a little when we're asking folks to assist us in these projects. But you know, I think just really trying to have an understanding of all the different sort of pieces that go into this puzzle is a challenge, because we work with so many different partners. We really need to know sort of what are their key priorities.
And I admire how tuned in you are to your constituents. It's really beautiful. Next is Patrick. Tell us what your obstacles are that you're facing.
Sure. So, I mean, of course, along those some similar lines, but I'd say, if I had to kind of identify one major issue that's cross-cutting of all our programs, it's uncertainty right now. And I think uncertainty is the biggest issue, the biggest obstacle we face. And of course, that crosses over to our next question about the pandemic. But more than that, if we talk specifically in relation to our program and the clients that we directly work with, well, the presidential election coming up provides such tremendous uncertainty for us. Depending on how this goes, you have on one hand the potential that we will not be resettling any more refugees. The number this year I think is down to 9,000, and that's nationally, not in the city of Cleveland, not in the state of Ohio. That is nationally 9,000 folks that we've resettled compared to 115,000 in 2016. Right. So if we see the election go in one direction, we're going to have I believe a further restriction of the refugee resettlement to the U.S. And on the other hand, if we see a Biden administration, well, he's pledging an intake the first year of around 95 to 125,000, which would present different obstacles, because then you have a system that's been completely atrophied over the past 4 years, then dealing with a large increase really quickly, within a period of a year, which is also going to present challenges. But I think it's another question. If we look at the uncertainty around this general thing, and not of refugee arrival, not just for us, but for the city of Cleveland, you also have to take into account the fact that manufacturing in Cleveland cannot get enough people to work in the industry. There are thousands of open jobs right now, and at a time where we're not looking at expanding immigration, but we're talking about potentially restricting immigration. So that uncertainty of what the future is going to look like, of what our client base is going to look like, is a continued challenge. Now, I think we're looking at that as, how do we make Cleveland, and I think, Kristin and Morgan spoke to this really well, how do we make Cleveland a welcoming city? How do we institute policies that are going to make this a place that people are going to want to live, so that we're not just looking at, newly arrived people coming in from across the world, but also having a magnet for people to move to Cleveland so that they can have lives here, because we know there's jobs, we know there's openings in the manufacturing and many more sectors right now that Cleveland needs. But all of these things to be able to, look at food policy, look at food security, look at sustainability, I think are also important factors in people's decisions to move here. Thanks.
And one of these uncertainties that we're facing, the many that we're facing, is going to be resolved soon. So at least we can say we'll know soon which way it goes, so that you can plan. Not that, it's going to take a while, but at least it's sooner than all the other uncertainty. So Ivan, can you talk to us now, or it still doesn't work? We'd like to hear from you. No, he doesn't hear us. So we're going to ask Morgan to answer the question about the obstacles.
Okay, cool. So I think about obstacles from kind of two different levels and perspectives. And I think one is kind of our global food system as it exists now, which is a system that is very powerful and well established to do what it aims to do, which is to make as much food as possible. And I think as a result of that system of producers and food processors and distributors and retailers, it's a very hard system to shift and change when it doesn't serve everybody equitably. And so I think for us, in Cleveland with the resources and the organizations that are working on these issues, we're trying to push against a global system. And I think that is a very huge challenge in itself. And I think for a community like Cleveland, the way that this represents in our community is, you know, a loss of grocery stores in our neighborhoods that have moved out to more affluent communities in the region. It is a distribution system that can't provide fresh produce and healthy food to smaller retailers who can't order in the larger quantities that supermarkets and supercenters can afford. And so it creates a lot of inequities in our system. And primarily low income and communities of color are often the most hard hit by these disparities. And so I think kind of fighting against and pushing against that with the resources that we have is a huge obstacle. But I think the other part of that system that's incredibly important to remember is how linked poverty and food access are together. Really excited to hear, Patrick, about the push to provide a living wage, because it really comes down to a family's ability to afford the food in their community and that purchasing power. And so when we think about food, we also need to think about access to healthcare. We need to think about climate change. We need to think about living wage and employment and training. We need to think about incarceration and criminal justice and how that impacts a family's ability to provide food for itself. We need to think about federal policy when it comes to things like SNAP and nutrition assistance and the school lunch program. So we are kind of tangling with all of these different systems and really trying to push for change that makes access to healthy food available to everybody. On a local basis, I think some of the obstacles for us are also shifting the paradigm and perception that organizations and institutions are the kind of knowledge bearers and have the solutions, and trying to get both institutions and philanthropy to really invest in community members to drive solutions in their own communities based on the needs that they're seeing. And so I think it's kind of shifting that paradigm of investment into people who can then drive long-term change in their community. And I think kind of tied into that is, and I know my colleagues in sustainability and climate change will appreciate this, it's also not something that's going to produce an outcome tomorrow. Like, this is a long-term investment strategy that we're investing in people to transform their communities. We're not going to see that 6 months from now. We might see little kind of pieces of it, little stars start to pop up, but we're talking about a long-term investment strategy in people and in communities that has a time horizon for impact over years, not months. And so I think really trying to expand what our expectations are, where we're making investments, and making it both a place and people strategy is really where we're trying to shift the conversation at FAIR.
Thank you, Morgan. Usually the chat about obstacles is usually not a happy one. Can you hear me? Yes, but it looks like you guys are actually handling it. So in a sense, it's still a happy deal. I also want to say that there's nothing like having fewer panelists, sadly, for making room for more discussion. So again, pluses and minuses. I'm sad that our Belgrade and the Ljubljana panelists didn't seem to be able to connect to us, because I was really interested in what's happening in their corner. And at this point, it's worth giving a shout out to Jenica Gonzalez for being able to work under pressure. It's unbelievable. We owe it to her that we still can chat. So I think we should move to our second question here, which is more detail on how specifically the pandemic has affected your work. And I also would like to ask you to do what you've done so far, which is also to tell us how you think about overcoming the pandemic issues, not resolving the pandemic itself, but rather how do you expect to handle these obstacles. So again, starting with Kristin. Thank you.
You know, I think now that we're 6-7 months in, my answer to that question probably looks a little different than it might have, say, 3 or 4 months ago. You know, I think like everyone, there of course is just the adjustment to the new working situation. You know, for just personally, I'm struggling sometimes productive at home and be able to focus on all that I need to, as compared to in the office. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that. And then additionally, I think from the sustainability perspective, there are certain things where I'm finding, to a certain extent, our hands are tied. A great example would be around waste. We, of course, try to promote as much waste reduction as possible. But in a time during a pandemic, PPE, personal protective equipment, is necessary. It's an essential piece of equipment that you need to wear to keep yourself safe. But how many of us have been in the store, walking on the sidewalk, and we see gloves or masks just laying around? I think we encourage folks to sort of take their responsibility, but we also recognize that we can't move away from that. Morgan made a great point about global systems. I think the pandemic is really going to, we're already seeing it mixing some things up. I'm excited that we have moved to a lot more virtual meetings, for example. Think about how much lower our carbon footprint is without all four of us driving downtown today. Or maybe you're biking or taking the rapid, but either way, sitting at home brings that down. But we can't ignore the economic side of things either. Sustainability is really about the people, planet, profit. So we need to make sure that we are not hurting our economy. But I'm excited that this is, I think, going to force folks, and we're already seeing it, to get a little bit more innovative, get a little bit more creative in how we address some of these problems. And I'm also seeing a lot of resilience built into the work that we're doing, sort of as a result of the uncertainty that we're seeing. So, we're not planning in-person events, and this way, we can focus our energy and make sure that those virtual ones are as successful as possible. I'm seeing folks get creative in how they actually do engage people, because as much as the virtual events are nice, I would have loved to have been in person with the four of you. I'm, certainly missing that human contact for sure. And going back to what we talked about earlier, the collaboration, we've been fortunate. All the people we work with are awesome and are able to connect online. But I think about how many residents that we otherwise might be touching at a community event or something, who may or may not have that internet access, that we're kind of missing in this much more digital space. So I'd say those are some of the big ones. I'm sure if I sat and talked about this longer, I could think about more, but I'll turn it over to Patrick to keep it going.
Thanks, Kristin. Yeah, I completely agree with the breakdowns there. I think we've been in remote working for quite a while, but I would say this pandemic has affected us in every area, right? In every touch point of our organization, in every program, some to greater or lesser degrees. The first is just kind of pretty structural, which is every year we do an annual benefit as a nonprofit. And we do it outside on the farm, and we get about 600 people out there. And it's a key part of our organization's ability to project our message and to raise funding for the cost of the year. Well, that was out. We actually went through 3 different designs on the benefit this year until we finalized on one that still allowed us to work with local restaurants and make food deliveries to home while we also had online events. So, it's that. I think the overall thought that puts in my head is just the need for continued adaptability and flexibility, which, honestly, as a nonprofit, it's something that is not uncommon for us to deal with anyway. Things are constantly changing in our line of work. But it's really put a spotlight on that. As far as the farm concerned, I think that's where we've seen probably the least effect. We closed down tours, it's not open to the public to walk through. But we've actually seen our sales grow. We've seen our farm stand sales grow this year. It's been our best year in sales by far over the last 10 years. And I think you've seen people, because we've been able to project, a really safe way to pick up food that is done outside, that is local. I think people have really responded to that locally. So that's been a positive. But the big areas that we've seen are about client services and education. So, what we saw right away starting in March was a number of layoffs in the populations we work with. And it didn't necessarily create these gaps, but it really exposed the gaps in social services for a lot of people who don't speak English as a first language and don't have access to computers or are not digitally literate. So as soon as all of those processes for unemployment, assistance and registration for applications, for SNAP updates, for Medicare and Medicaid updates, as soon as all that went online, it became virtually impossible for so many of our clients to access, because everything was in English and maybe a few Spanish resources, but none of the languages that we operate with. So we really had to shift gears very quickly and provide a lot of these direct client services. So again, it wasn't something that's new because of the pandemic, but it was exacerbated because of the pandemic. And it really showed, how some of these services, how some of these programs are just not designed to be very accessible for second language speaking folks. Education is, I think, where we've seen the biggest shift and where we've had to pivot the most. We work with, I'd say right now, 95% of our students are in CMSD. And CMSD has moved to an online model, and that required a lot of quick thinking at the beginning and has required a lot of new program design for us. So how do we make sure that our families are online? How do we make sure that they have a device? How do we make sure we know what's going on and that kids are actually joining their programs? And then how do we make sure that they're staying online, right? And they're keeping apart and keeping updated with their education. The students that are at the greatest risk of falling behind are especially lower income, non-English speaking households. Having that out of school time really jeopardizes all of the gains that they've made. So that's been a big area of our focus. So, again, the pandemic it's really touched on every aspect of our programming, but, Sandra, as you mentioned, when we talked about challenges, it's also opened up a lot of opportunities, right? It's looked at, okay, how can we do this differently? How can we make sure that we're delivering these products in a different manner? So it's not, putting our head in the sand and saying, oh my God, the pandemic, there's nothing we can do. That's not a choice. That's not an option we have. And that's certainly not a luxury that the families that we work with have, right? They're mostly essential workers. They're still having to go into work regardless. And we need to make sure that we're being as adaptable and as resilient as the people that we work with and support are. So I think it's pushed us to take that on and to be adaptable in our models as well.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how you make do. And I'm also surprised at how many points in common we share. Personally, with your work. First of all, I've worked for years as an interpreter for immigrants, so I know how that goes a little bit. And I also am working with disaster preparedness, and I know I have learned tons about all sorts of useful things. I don't know that we needed a pandemic for me to learn, but since it happened, at least there's some learning happening. And I think that if a next one comes during our lifetimes, it's supposed to be once in a lifetime, but if a next one comes, we'll know better what to do. So now I want to let Morgan tell her angle about COVID.
Thank you. So I think many of us have kind of seen some of the shifts that have happened during COVID and the pandemic as it relates to food access, because it's been in the headlines in a lot of different ways. I think when the pandemic first started, some of us may have seen pictures of farmers dumping produce when we had long lines at the food bank. And I think that's indicative of the systems that we were talking about earlier in this conversation and how they are really tailored to do very specific things. So for a farmer to shift from supplying a university or hospital system with wholesale product versus getting that product into a grocery store, those are two different systems built different ways. And we saw that they cannot interact or shift very quickly. And so I think those images were startling of farmers dumping produce, dumping milk down the drain when we saw families lined up for miles in their cars trying to get access to food at a food bank. And so I think that's one kind of more global, challenge within our system that the pandemic really highlighted. I think the other one was, and Patrick, you spoke about this, is our frontline essential workers. And I think if we think about the food system and we think about grocery store workers, we think about farmers, we think about meat processors, restaurants, a lot of those frontline workers, I think, are often our most underpaid and undervalued, but they were critical to helping all of us survive in this pandemic by continuing to work. And they often suffered high rates of COVID infections as a result, because they're working very closely. These systems were not really built to protect workers from the pandemic. And so I think there were economic impacts, health impacts, but then also this larger global food system that is not as resilient and nimble as adaptable, I think, as we had hoped it would be. So I think those were some of the shifts that we saw happening kind of globally, but locally, what we did as FAIR, because a lot of our work, similar to my colleagues here, is very community-based. So we had to, as soon as the shutdown happened in mid-March, we had to kind of figure out, what are we going to do now? We can't be out in the community doing programs and engaging community members. So we decided to really understand the Cleveland food system and how our Cleveland food system was responding to the pandemic, particularly around food access, and interviewed about 32 of our partners, urban growers, farmers market managers, food pantry managers, local food retailers, to really understand what are the dynamics that they're seeing and some of the shifts, and where are the gaps and where are the needs. And I think some of our takeaways were how that kind of national and global supply chain was affecting the ability for smaller stores to get the food that they needed in their communities. That a lot of that food was going directly to larger purchasers like grocery stores and supermarkets. So the smaller neighborhood stores weren't able to get meat, fresh produce, because the supply chains were just, all kind of jumbled up and messed up. So that was a major issue. So people weren't able to get the food that they needed. We saw about 30% of the food pantries in Cleveland close down because a lot of their volunteers were older and a much more vulnerable population to the virus. And so you had many neighborhood-based pantries and meal programs that serve our most vulnerable people who are not able to do that because they had to protect their volunteers. And so what happened was larger organizations would set up kind of drive-through food distributions, which, if you don't have a car, creates a different type of inequity. And if you have transportation issues and can't get to some of these places, I think that fractured the ability for people to have a strong, resilient safety net to provide food for their families. I think here in Cleveland, another challenge was the schools are a major provider of meals for our children in Cleveland, breakfast, lunch, and sometimes dinner. And when our schools went remote, the school district here really tried to provide food to families and pivot their ability to create pickups for kids to come pick up meals with their families for a couple days, but we saw participation rates in those programs between 10 and 20%. And so we have rising rates of food insecurity, particularly among children and particularly among people of color here in Cleveland, but also nationally as a result of the pandemic, and that gap just continues to widen. So I think we saw a lot of systems that were also uncoordinated, and we would have kind of pantry and meal programs that would be on the 3 consecutive days in a month instead of throughout the month. So people had a constant supply of food. Pantries were very overwhelmed. We did also, in talking with folks, kind of to what you were speaking, Patrick, there's been a surge in gardening and interest in local food production. Farmers and farmers markets, we've had sales of SNAP sales at farmers markets across Cleveland. That's our nutrition assistance program that surpassed 2019 already. So we're really seeing people think about ways that they can get their food that supports the local economy in outdoor environments. And so I think where some of the interesting things, if you could call them benefits, are people really investing in local economies, people gardening. We saw an explosion in community gardening here in Cleveland, which, if you think about it historically, often happens when we are in a recession. 2008, we saw the same thing with the real estate crisis and the recession. There's just an explosion in interest in gardening as a way to connect with your family and as a way to provide food for your family. So I think there's been a lot of different types of shifts. For our work with FAIR, we've been involved with a partner called Neighborhood Connections and have been doing grassroots grant making since April, supporting about 100 different community projects that address basic needs, including access to healthy food and social connection, and have put about $300,000 out into the community to support grassroots leaders leading projects in their own communities. And then we've recently gotten back in the community to think about our partnerships. We look at corner and convenience stores, our small retailers, as an opportunity for engagement. So we pivoted that work, which used to be nutrition education inside the store, to an outside the store outreach event where we do voter registration, help with census forms. We also provide free masks, reusable masks, and PPE. And then we're also doing a community survey to really understand what residents' needs are during that time. So we've also kind of tried to pivot to really continue to take in information and understand how we need to adjust our programming in order to make sure that we are serving the people and working with the people that really have the critical issues in response to the pandemic and whose families are most affected.
The moment that I'm taking is that I have to mute myself, just so you know why there's a pause every time. So again, I'm incredibly heartened that we are in good hands in Cleveland. So it's like amazing what you all can do. My next question, actually it occurred to me that we sort of heard all sorts of bits and pieces and answers to my next question about how the audience and the public can help you. So it occurs to me that maybe you want to ask each other some question, or you want to just tell us something that I didn't ask that we should hear from you, instead of fitting into my straitjacket of questions. So go ahead, Kristin.
I don't know if I have any specific questions for either of the other two panelists, other than to just say thank you both for the work that you're doing, and just even sitting here, it's great to listen to all that you've been kind of pushing through during these really difficult times. I can only, I feel like I'm maybe a little privileged in the city that we have a bigger infrastructure to, I guess, deal with some of the pandemic. Granted, we're a little isolated in the Office of Sustainability, so I might be, there may be other city employees that feel very differently, but just to see the work that they're doing is very inspiring to me, and it helps keep driving the work that we do at the city level as well. I think one of the things that you did touch on kind of earlier on was what folks in the audience can do. And I think, this is for us, we're constantly trying to solve this problem. We joke sometimes that we hope to not have an Office of Sustainability one day because we are just doing things the right way. I know I have some job security for a little while still, but I think we're really trying to push both the departments and organizations that we work with to take a little bit of the responsibility for whatever the work that they're doing. It's really inspiring for me when one of our departments, like our capital projects, for example, comes to our office and says, hey, we have this idea for a grant, we're going to go apply for it. Where historically it was us kind of pushing them and saying, can we do this? Can you help with it? We need this information. So the fact that they're kind of taking that on their own without us it's a very comforting feeling to know that we don't have to own all of this, and it's starting to permeate throughout some of our city departments. And the same thing goes on the residential side. It's no secret here in Cleveland that we have a waste and recycling challenge right now. Our curbside recycling program had to go on hold back in April. Partially just, again, those global systems that Morgan was talking about, we're really at the mercy of the markets for the recyclable material. And if folks aren't going to buy it, it's hard for us to keep collecting it and paying that extra cost when the benefits aren't being realized. But that has also, so of course this happened amid a pandemic, and our office really had to help in responding to that sort of crisis. We had a lot of folks saying, what happened? Why don't we have a recycling program? And I think it's really, you know, at least for me personally, and I've seen it with others, it's forced me to rethink what I'm buying, how I'm using stuff, how I'm disposing of things. I mean, especially being at home, this stuff is literally staring me in the face sometimes, because I have, I'm going to say, a little bit of hoarder tendencies where I'm like, I can't throw it away. It's really hard for me to just toss it out. But you know, I'm holding on to things until I can find outlets to recycle them. So then, you know, that impacts me when I'm at the store. So rather than buying something that's got, you know, one box with 15 individual packages, can I buy one larger box with just a big one, and I just portion it out for myself as I need to. Or repurposing things. You know, I just recently got these big shampoo bottles that are a little too big to use in the shower, but I was like, oh, maybe I'll go buy some smaller ones to use. And I'm like, well, I have these other smaller ones that just got emptied. I'll just pour them in there and go from there, and saved myself some dollars as well. So it's something that, and I think, you know, we're struggling with it, because then when you are home, we're finding a lot of folks are like, well, let me just hop on Amazon or Walmart and see what I can purchase. And that convenience is great. The safety of not having to go into a store is great. But when you think about sort of the energy, the carbon, everything that goes into making and delivering those products, it is definitely, you know, it's only adding to that challenge of getting us to, you know, hopefully a more local circular economy. So that's some stuff. Our annual sustainability summit is coming up next month. I'm going to give it just one quick plug there, and we're going to have tons of breakout topics on some of the things that both Morgan and Patrick have talked about, but also topics like circular economy, urban drawdown, capturing our organic waste. And for me, that one is a very exciting topic. We don't have tons of time to go into it now, but like that's, for me, what got me into sustainability is that idea of more of a natural balance in our systems, and working more with and like nature, as opposed to kind of trying to control it ourselves. So yeah, I invite all of you to please join us at the summit. We'll get into these topics more, but I'm going to stop there so we have enough time for the other two to answer. So I think, Patrick, take it away.
I've already told my students, by the way, to attend the summit. And I hope they hear from you that instead of waiting for the government to impose everything on us, they should take some responsibility and use less. They just keep suggesting all sorts of policies to impose this and impose that, which don't happen, right? So I want them to actually just act. Go, Patrick.
Great. So, you know, I think there's a lot of really simple ways. And I think sometimes when we get into these talks about what can I personally do around sustainability, it becomes very theoretical. It becomes very unapproachable. You know, I don't think you need to shift to a 100% locally sourced, completely sustainable lifestyle in order to make a difference. And usually that's not the best first way to start. A couple of simple things, you know, in Cleveland, you know, we have a great organization called Rust Belt Riders that does composting. And, you know, they'll train you how to do composting. They'll pick up your compost. They'll help you establish in your backyard. You know, we compost in the backyard. It has the easiest thing you could possibly do. And it makes such a big impact on, you know, the amount and volume of waste that's going into landfills. It's a simple thing. You know, thing is, like, buy local. Like, again, you don't have to buy everything local. I don't think that's what we're saying, but just start with a couple products you know you want, with a couple businesses, small businesses that have products that you like and that you can use, and then try it out. You know, I would say preferably choose one that has a great social mission, like the Ohio City Farm. I'd be remiss not to put a plug in. But there's a lot of great local businesses and local producers that you can tap into, and just, you know, start with a toe in the water. You don't need to jump the whole way in. And I think that way can make a real difference. You know, looking at, you know, I think we were on a great, you know, track in 2019 talking about single-use plastic, and my goodness, has that just completely flown out the window in the last year. You know, and I think we need to get back to that conversation in some practical ways. You know, we've shifted to a 100% compostable plastic bag that's made of organic products that we pack our CSA in. So these products do exist, but I think it's, that's on some of the local producers and small businesses to accept those. Maybe they're a little bit more costly than some of the single-use disposable plastic, but ultimately that's going to be what we found is that's going to be something very attractive for our customer base. So even though it costs a little bit more, we are seeing a return on that investment. So, my advice would be, as far as this topic is concerned, there's some really easy ways you can start getting involved in the local economy that has sustainability, foremost in mind. And there's things you can do at home that don't cost anything to get started on. And it doesn't have to be perfect, right? You don't have to have the solution yourself to climate change, but doing something and then learning a little bit more about it. And I would really encourage people to check out the Rust Belt Riders, because they are a gold, just a total gem of a local small business that does so much on a practical way for using your compost.
Morgan, time flies, and so we have about 2 minutes if you have something interesting, which you always do, to tell us, and then I'll need 1 minute to thank everybody. So go for it.
Sure. Yeah, I would just kind of support Patrick's kind of buy local, supporting local farms, local businesses, local restaurants. I think some of the other things that people can do is get involved in gardening. I think one of the issues that I've noticed is a lack of social connection, and our gardening spaces, particularly community gardening spaces, are safe places to be outside with other people who we may not live with or aren't in our family. When we need a fresh connection with somebody, it's a really great way to continue to come together in this community, even during a pandemic. I think also, if you are able, if you are not a vulnerable population, if you're younger, volunteering at your local food banks, food pantries, meal programs, and really helping to support these really critical access points for healthy food access in our communities is another, I think, opportunity to really give right now. And then I think, lastly, it's kind of maybe a bigger ask is to really think about working with neighbors in your community to think about more resilient food systems at the neighborhood level. How do you link stores, pantries and meal programs, school lunch programs? How can we get some innovative ideas from community members on how to solve some of these really pressing challenges? And so I think working together in our communities, whether it's a block club or street club or neighborhood association, how can food be a part of that conversation so we ensure that everybody has access to the food that they need, especially during this pandemic?
So this was a marathon answer. So I want to take the opportunity to thank Global Cleveland for this opportunity to listen into all that you've had to say. This was fascinating. I hope the audience wasn't too frustrated that we didn't have time for some interaction. And I would like again to thank our sponsors, which include, I have to find it here. Yes, Platform Brewery, Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Supply Side Group, Ulmer and Byrne, Rotary Club of Cleveland, Eaton, Taiwan Sister Cities, CIP USA, Margaret Wong and Associates, Team Neo, Peace Corps, 12 Literary Arts, and the people I have dealt with at Global Cleveland who are masterful at organizing, and again, Jenica Gonzalez, who lived through this anxiety-ridden session. So thank you very much. It was a wonderful panel. I totally enjoyed it, and I hope you did too.